So, let's talk about big party inertia, because this is one of the biggest campaign killers there are. It needs to be solved even before one starts DMing, let alone leaving it for late. And yet, I hate this sort of thing. You have baity titles like, you need to know this before you know. I hate that sort of stuff. So, how do we deal with big party inertia? That's the subject today. Welcome, friends and adventurers. Welcome to the DM table. What is big party inertia? Well, when you have 5 members, 6 members at your table that are players, maybe even with 4 members, but certainly the bigger the party, the bigger the inertia, because what happens? Every time something needs to be done, all good players that don't have too much experience are careful about what everybody else at the table wants. That is good. What isn't good is that this creates incredible lag, because the more people there is, the more people are likely to get confused about what the party wants to do, because if a player is sitting at the table and has 1 friend next to him or 2 friends next to them, they can decide almost on the spot what they want to do or say, feeling easily the synergy with concentrating on just 1 or 2 people besides listening to the DM, but sort of ignoring DM socially in a way, because DM is sort of like a screen of your PC that gives you the graphics and the speakers that give you the sound. But DM is sort of invisible and everywhere, even if you're looking right at him or her. So, when there's a small party of players at the table, because you can have parties extended by other characters, which is really good for small parties and it helps. But when you have small party, the small party is dynamic because they think quicker and they speak together quicker and they speak to each other quicker, and there's less of them to speak to each other, you know, from each of their standpoints. So the small party moves along better, the small party synergizes better, the small party doesn't wait to see what everybody else is doing, because at 6 people, this is everybody. It's like a sea of people, because even if they're all your friends, you need to wait for 5 people to sort of give you social cues and hints. This is not the same as when you have a small team that jumps at every opportunity. And yes, players will be careful and everybody will think carefully what to even say in the first place. Now remember, this initial decision needs to be made. So now everybody out of those 6 people or 5 people or even 4 people will think carefully when they can speak, to whom they should speak first, how they should form it, and how they should be careful not to infringe on everybody's or anybody's playing territory, because you know, everybody wants everybody to have fun, everybody wants everybody to play, and so nobody wants to step on anybody else's playing. So this is mathematics, it multiplies. And you have parties that you think are reluctant, that you think are indecisive, that you think have analysis paralysis and indecision, inability to act, but they in fact have big party inertia, which is what is binding them down. If you could solve the problem simply, I would have just told you how to do it, but best solution is to have 2 parties. If you have lots of friends that want to play your D&D, you just, run 2 campaigns in separate, and they can join together occasionally for some joint missions and stuff, or have somebody else DM the other group and be a player, because you want to be a player. That is the best way to not get burnt out as a DM, to keep sampling your product in this case from somebody else's hand. Unfortunately, it would have been such an invention if we could DM to ourselves, wouldn't it? But yes, in any case, big party inertia really slows down the campaigns, and it's almost impossible to run a sandbox that people frequently request when there's a big party. And this also prevents some other cool things that you want to have that now you kind of don't. Personal lines are much more undeveloped because splitting the party is always a worry on everybody's mind, and yet doing things by themselves is always again a worry on everybody's mind, and so individuality is lost a lot. You have less ideas, you have less dynamic players, you have players that start a lot less things, and what they start is the safest thing that they could be starting, or the least safe, whatever they think will get the most party approval. They will always try to have a consensus, which is a good thing, but they will always try to have one, which is to say that they will always make one at the spot. They will sit and discuss how to do something until safest solution is found and everybody follows through, because this is a bigger group dynamic. You do not have this individual changing of who does great ideas. What you ideally want is Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, where they sort of interchange when one shines in the spotlight and leads the other by the hand into some fun stuff that they remember. But what you get here is an army squad that waits for a leader to give instructions because they're a little, scout brigade. But there is no leader frequently because everybody at the table is equal. And they won't want to try to break that up unless you have uncooperative players, at which point things will form differently, but you won't get better performance because uncooperative people are uncooperative. So in any case, we need to solve this big party inertia, and that's why I frequently recommend smaller parties. That's just why I do it. That's been my experience anywhere I've watched a party of 6 or more play. And I do feel strongly that this is the case for parties of 5 or perhaps even 4. At 4, you have the argument that it could go either way. It's interesting because this has been noticed in D&D over generations of editions where recommended party was and used to be 6, but then they tuned it down to 4 now in 5th edition. So they noticed this among other things and recommended lower numbers. But I recommend slightly even lower numbers where 1 or 2 or 3 people are quite sufficient, believe me, especially since you want to find the players, and if you're not in some huge country with lots of D&D, it's gonna be hard finding players, and you could play your tabletop, whatever it is, with one other person, just one other person. If you get 2 other people, great. If you get 3 other people, fantastic. It's not even a loss, believe me. You can fully enjoy perfectly everything to utter perfection with small party and solve the big party inertia, and also have, if you have more friends, you have where to play, you have where to join the campaign, because somebody will also DM the other party and you can be one of the people who play, not just one of the people who DM. So that solves forever DMing as well. Also, having a smaller party makes for better role-playing because you'll have people have more time under spotlight and more time to improvise and more personal time to say stuff, how they would say stuff. In bigger parties, there's lots of talking atop of each other because there's just no time. We all want to get as much out of our D&D session as we can. So there will be some talking on top of each other, and even if this is not the case somehow, and it doesn't even matter if you have people, if you have 6 people at the table, each individual has much less time in their own perception to speak, so they'll make short decisions, short role-play events. They'll just say, this has happened to me when I first sat down at the table as a player under a DM. I tried to say, let's look under the carpet for 5 times, but yeah, even if it was immediately heard and listened to by the party, it's still something that was short. You don't get to play as much with your fellow players. You much more have a sort of a group that is trying to get some voices out to the DM. And even if you get highly advanced, experienced players that know how to take their turn and be careful with each other and do all that stuff, you will still have perceptibly less footage for each of them that they can afford for themselves and their ideas. So even if you occasionally have a big speech, even if you occasionally have a big event, you could have a much more dynamic and fantastic of a campaign with just splitting that party in two and having still everything, having both, everybody's playing, everybody can even play in the same world if you're the same DM. You just don't need to do it all at once. You can even schedule better because, live playing requires lots of scheduling. So it's easier to have 3 people that have one schedule in one slot and 3 people that have different schedules in different slot, and then they can enjoy better having more consistenter campaigns and situations and so on. So I hope this shows you why I was recommending smaller parties and how to recognize and hopefully avoid as much as possible big party inertia, because that is a lurking thing in tabletop role-playing. So I wish you luck on your adventures to avoid it. And adventurer, if you thought this was unique, maybe you can spare me a bit of a click, and I could see you here next and perhaps every week. I would love to hear your opinions and questions in the comments. I really would love to, so if you have anything, do tell, and I'll make sure to reply. And then we can see each other again soon. Next time. Bye.